Stick around to the end of the video, there's a fun little surprise for you if you do. Video games can achieve a lot of different things. Some, like Dishonored, Prototype, even Skyrim or Call of Duty, are power fantasies. They allow the player to perform superhuman feats like teleportation, a regeneration factor that would put Deadpool to shame, or the ability to destroy mighty foes like dragons with nothing but your voice. These types of games allow the player to embrace the feeling of unadulterated, unparalleled
world-dominating power.
Other games, meanwhile, might focus more on world building, character relationships, unique mechanics, or, like Paradise Killer, maybe the game focuses on presenting a completely original world whose timeline diverges from our own, with riveting history and lore, compelling mysteries, tangled webs of conspiracy, and amusing dialogue absolutely brimming with subtext. Nothing major. I first bought Paradise Killer on a whim. I did not expect to enjoy it. The colors were really bombastic, the characters seemed over the top, and none of this seemed like it would be saved by even the most competent and enjoyable to solve of murder mysteries. I was very wrong. I was so enraptured and taken in by the world and the characters and the mystery that I remember buying it around noon and playing it until 2 in the morning until I had completed the game and successfully solved the mystery. But when I've tried to replicate my experience with others, it doesn't seem like they're enjoying it as much as I did, which is fine. But I do worry a lot of that lack of enjoyment is stemming from how convoluted the world can be, how difficult to understand some of the history is, and most importantly, how the mystery itself actually ties into the history. AKA, if you don't fully understand the history and the actual setting of the game, a lot of the mysteries, twists, and turns probably won't make sense. This is a mystery game with an extremely unique, self-defined setting. The only game I can think to compare it to is Danganronpa. They're both murder mystery games with incredibly one-of-a-kind settings and characters. Paradise Killer is that, except it's a single murder mystery that you can choose to wrap up and take to trial at any point in the game. And I think that's what drew me to it so strongly. At any point, I can decide that I've learned enough and it's time to prosecute. Of course, that freedom was mostly in name only. I scoured this game for any shred of evidence, any bit of lore or character dynamics or dialogue that could call into question my theories. I was voracious in my approach to solving this game's mysteries and secrets, so I can understand why other people might not be as engaged in the process as I originally was. So, because this is a mystery game, and these indie darling videos are really meant to entice you to play, I'm not going to tell you the mystery, I'm not going to tell you the result, the ending, etc. I am going to tell you about the lore. I think the lore of Paradise Killer almost carries the entire experience for me. Don't get me wrong, I think this game is pretty near to perfect for what it sets out to accomplish, but the lore and the setting and the characters are insultingly good. I am a writer, and I feel offended that I didn't think of this whole story first. I am admittedly more offended by the 2-year-old Destructoid review that claimed the world was boring, but that's okay. You're allowed to be objectively incorrect. I will survive. Hey. There's a lot to go through, but Paradise Killer's lore is genuinely one of my favorite pantheons of gods and history and betrayals in any game I've ever played, if not my absolute favorite. Yes, there is a pantheon. Allow me to read a few descriptions of the gods because they're so fucking cool. Cosmic Deceit, the many-armed iguana, buried under the shifting sands of the bizarre purple desert hidden in Egypt. A nasty and selfish god. He died after his plan to seduce Romeo's silence was foiled by the Syndicate. Dire Rose, the fish that vomits skeletons, laid siege to France for 3 centuries before the siege was broken in the Great Betrayal. Blood Dancer, gifted technology to many races, astral engineer without equal, thinks nothing of ethics, and used much of her technology to perform genocides across entire planets. This game is a masterclass. Dude, it's so cool. This game is a masterclass in world building and creating intrigue purely through environment, character relationships, and history. With all that said, I'll stop sucking its dick and actually start explaining what the hell is happening with the lore of Paradise Killer. On a synthetic wannabe utopia, populated by alien-worshipping humans granted immortality by a space goat, I probably shouldn't start there. The first thing to understand about Paradise Killer's world is that while it's fantastical and obviously fiction, Earth does exist. In fact, the game mentions Earth, the Moon, and locations on Earth like the Sahara Desert, Russia, England, etc. It also mentions locations supposedly on Earth that absolutely do not exist in our world. Thus, I consider it a divergent timeline. However, in all of the historical mentions like characters' birth dates, none of the years go past around AD 1000. This, in my mind, is around where the timelines diverge, probably closer to 8950, and the reason I say that is because there's mentions of ever-growing palaces and god-like buildings being constructed on Earth, and some people are born in those buildings in around AD 995, meaning these have been on Earth at least a little while. To be clear, I'm not claiming to be an expert on this game's lore, but I am claiming to have paid a lot of attention and to have meticulously searched every corner of the game world to snag every collectible possible, and those collectibles do sometimes contain little nuggets of lore. While we don't know what Earth year the story of Paradise Killer actually takes place in, we can do a little math. The protagonist, Lady Lovedice, has been in exile for 3,004,769 days. We don't know what year this exile started, but we can determine the absolute minimum amount of time that's passed based on the latest birth date we know. Based on her exile alone, over 8,200 years have passed. Let's say AD 1000 is our reference point. That means that on Earth, unless there's some time distortion effect that, to my knowledge, is not mentioned in the game, the year is at least 9,232. The reason this matters is because the NPCs and the player character, while immortal, are human. We learn that this group of immortals known as the Syndicate were granted everlasting life by the god they revere above all others, Silent Goat. This god, sadly, sacrificed themselves to help the Syndicate when they realized their own life was forfeit. Part of the reason I explain this is just because a lot of the Syndicate members have functional cell phones, so their birthdays being in AD 1000 while they're using a bunch of complicated technology might be a bit confusing from an outside perspective. A bit, maybe. So, the Syndicate exists in their own little pocket dimension, essentially, but it's made very clear they can access Earth, and they use this power to kidnap humans and their cell phones, wipe their memories, and force them to worship the Syndicate's dead or dying gods with the goal of resuscitating them. There's also mentions of Syndicate members wanting to stage invasions of Earth in order to save trapped gods or repel a group known only as the God Hunters, presumably the political opposites of the Syndicate. I'd actually love a spin-off game where we play as one of the God Hunters. I think it'd really flesh out this already amazing world. Now at this point you might be wondering why gods can die, why they can be resurrected, etc., etc. There's no definitive answer to that beyond it's fiction, stop asking questions, but I will say they're not actually gods. Paradise Killer mentions gods and demons, both of which are very real factions in this world. But the distinction is kind of moot. Demons and gods are both very clearly described as beings from deep space that have clawed their way to either one of the Syndicate's island sequences or to Earth, guiding themselves with the psychic pathways that result from worship and rituals. In other words, there are no gods, there are no demons, they're all aliens.
Just look up at the night sky. Each one of those lights is probably an alien.
The main difference being the gods have made contact with the Syndicate and Earth, been given names and distinctions, and are clearly recognized as singular beings and worshipped to the extent that they're seen as gods. Demons, meanwhile, arrive in the exact same way gods do, as a result of worship and psychic energies, yet they're seen as demons, either because they're destructive, they're bad at PR, or just in general, we have enough gods, go away. Demons, ironically, are seen as a corruptive influence and a byproduct of excess psychic energy, yet they were drawn here in the exact same manner the gods were. This does explain why both gods and demons can die. They're just aliens whose powers are so esoteric and so insane that they're very difficult to understand. We get to see 2 demons in the game, 3 if you count gods as demons, but let's not spoil that, and one of them is even alive when we see them. Lucky us! Shinji is a constant presence in the game and is the first NPC you speak to. If you seek this guy out, he has some of the most interesting dialogue in the game. He postulates on the murder mystery you're meant to solve. Remember that? There's a murder mystery in this game? Anyway, he postulates on the murder mystery, everywhere from this could be a conspiracy, or some sicko just out for a power trip, or even, most chillingly, a pack of wolves. He unironically suggests that a pack of wolves, which don't exist on this island sequence, broke through 4 serious, sometimes magical security measures and killed the council. And then he chastises you for not considering all possible angles. This game's awesome, man. So, What's the crime, and why does it matter? It's a pretty good question for any mystery game, so allow me to describe it. This crime is also something that hooked me into the game right away, because it's a closed room murder, which is one of my favorite types of murder mystery. The Syndicate have a ruling body called the Council, and the Council was in their chambers right before the current island sequence was being retired. I'll explain the islands and the concept of sequences in just a moment. The Council gathered in their chambers, and they still haven't come out. This would be strange at most, except there is a demonically possessed citizen, citizens being the humans kidnapped from Earth by the Syndicate, who was found outside the entrance to the Council chambers with a bloody knife and the blood of every member of the Council in his stomach. When you arrive on the island, pretty much everyone except the impartial judge is convinced that Henry, this possessed citizen, is clearly responsible for the crime, and thanks to the structure of the game, you can gather evidence on Henry, present it at trial, and convict him pretty much immediately. It's up to you, as the player, to seek out potential pieces of evidence that exonerate him, or even implicate others who could have used him as a scapegoat. If you want to. Let's explain the islands and their sequences. There's a good bit of lore around this, but I'm going to try to be as brief as possible because I think learning how the islands work and their history is a super fun part of the game. So here's a condensed version of it. Silent Goat's sacrifice allowed two things. The Syndicate's immortality, as well as their island sequences. These islands act as safe havens for the god worshippers, allowing them to conduct their rituals and worship in peace, relatively. Because of the exact thing they kidnap and force citizens to partake in, worship of the gods, psychic energy is leaked from the islands and attracts demons from the stars. These demons find their way to the island and either possess the citizen conducting the ritual, as in the case of Henry, or if no host can be found, their icky energy apparently soaks into the very structure of the stone foundation of the island, most likely tearing it apart over time. Now, these demons are either inherently more destructive, untamed, or just so disinterested in the Syndicate's desires and well-being that they don't care to hold back like the gods may be doing, because unlike their godly brethren, demons can actually corrupt the island in a very visible, obvious way. This isn't some mumbo-jumbo that has been hand-waved by the Syndicate as demonic. These are very obvious, clear areas where you can witness demonic corruption firsthand, both in environments and in people. The game takes place on Island Sequence 24, right before the fabled Perfect 25, which is thus named because architect Carmelina, the Syndicate member blessed with the ability to both create and mold the island sequences in almost any way, has claimed she's managed to craft an island sequence with perfect defenses against demonic corruption, completely inoculating it from any potential screw-ups that would necessitate a new sequence. Is this actually possible? Maybe, but that's what's necessary to understand about the sequences. They are the Syndicate's HQ, and the exact thing that the Syndicate keeps doing in order to resurrect their dead alien gods is also the same thing that destroys each of their HQs and forces them to craft new ones. Guys, stop it. Stop, okay? You keep asking about the murder and the crime and the characters. Shut up, okay? I need to talk about the world because that Destructoid article that totally didn't piss me off claimed the world was super boring, okay? To be clear, I do have a criticism for the game. But holy hell, is it not that the world is boring, because that's objectively wrong, fuck you. Here we go. We get an overhead view of the world at the very beginning of the game, right before we Geronimo our way onto the island, permanently paralyzing the main character. What if that did happen? Like the exile had taken away her resistance to fall damage. She forgot to put on her Feather Falling 5 boots, that's what it was. Anyway, right before we jump, we get to see the island in its entirety. Right away, it looks haphazard. You could argue this is lazy game design, but actually it makes sense. Keep in mind these aren't organic cities that have naturally grown to accommodate the increasing needs of its populace. This is an island paradise crafted specifically by one person, essentially playing SimCity and building things in the order that particular person decides. The end result being a little unfocused and even messy does actually make sense when considering this is crafted purely by one flawed person. She clearly just puts things where she thought they should go, with very little regard for infrastructure. In the game world itself, we see lots of different sorts of architecture. The most obvious is probably Japanese in the apartment buildings and residential areas, but you can see tons of other influences in the ziggurat, where something called the sacrifice ritual takes place, or even just the armor that the world's standing army wears. The golden animal imagery has a really Egyptian feel to it in my eyes. This mishmash of cultures makes perfect sense when you consider the populace is almost entirely made up of kidnapped Earthlings who have a bunch of their own different cultures. So no, Fuck off. The game world is incredibly unique, well thought out, and dare I say it, dope. In fact, it's probably one of the best parts of the game, which is perhaps why I took that criticism so hard. Dude, they have a big crystal gyro thing called the reality folding drive, which you can platform up to and marvel at. Suck my god-worshipping dick if you think that that's not fucking awesome. Get this, almost everything I've talked about, minus the architecture, comes up at some point as important information to solve the case. Recognizing the logic of the world you're in is paramount to solving the murder mystery. Probably why I loved it so much. You need to unravel the mystery of the environment before the mystery within the environment will even start to make sense. If you don't understand that the Syndicate actually traveled to Earth on the reg to kidnap worship slaves, then you may misunderstand the important distinction between immortal Syndicate members and innocent kidnapped humans. If you don't understand that gods are pretty active presences in the world and can even bless worshippers they select, you might miss out on an important detail that puts a certain suspect in a very bad light. This is why Paradise Killer gets so much patience from me with its odd, unconventional setting. The setting is integral to the mystery making sense. It's not filler, it's not something they just shat out on a Wednesday night like the script to this video. It's 100% necessary for the mystery to work at all, meaning understanding it is 100% necessary to solving the mystery. Finally, let's talk about the game's currency. This could have easily been a throwaway sack of gold coins, but the developers chose to world build even more with something as simple as the currency system, for which they have my utmost respect. Blood crystals. Weird, right? Not really. There's a society of god worshippers who believe that blood sacrifice and worship is a valuable resource for the gods they follow, meaning blood has an inherent value in this society as it's seen as a vital part of worshipping the gods. It makes perfect sense that a world of blood sacrificing zealots would place a monetary value on blood. It's not just blood either. There's a certain collectible called a crystallized tear necklace, and its description says it's very valuable, and sometimes people will inflict misery on others in an attempt to pan for crystallized tears. Bodily fluids have a strange amount of value in this society. So blood crystals are the currency, and funnily enough, the developers even explained why there's currency lying around all over the world, something they could have easily hand-waved or ignored. Instead, they provide a very funny, realistic reason you're finding valuable blood crystals scattered about like my sanity after reading that Destructoid article. Shinji, that demon from earlier, thought it'd be a laugh to just borrow the blood crystals from everyone and scatter them everywhere for you to find. He's not even subtle about his distaste for the currency either. A lot of the crystals can be found in trash cans. He's just fucking around. And you know what? This fits his character, and I think it's a great reason we're finding all these valuable currency everywhere. Another detail the devs could have just not explained, but they chose to, and I love them for it. So there's still a lot to talk about, but I don't want to spoil the game. I think this is a detective game anyone who likes mystery should play. The world is a little off-putting at first, I can confirm that from my own experience, but I can also confirm that once you sink your teeth into the setting and the characters and their dynamics, it's incredibly gripping, and also incredibly respectful of your intelligence and time. Also, if you're like the person who wrote that Destructoid article, let me show you a quick little tip that I figured out on day one of playing that pretty much renders fast travel moot. At one point, when using the footbaths around the city, which are where you can exchange blood crystals for upgrades, you can unlock the Air Dash upgrade. This is the most broken ability in the game, and opens up pretty much every area to you minus ones with locked doors and story-gated content. You can leap over fences, bypass minor puzzles, but most importantly, if you jump and air dash at a slight downward angle, you can move forward while priming yourself to do that exact thing again right away. Meaning you jump, air dash, etc., zooming you across the map probably faster than it would take you to watch all the fast travel cutscenes and pick a location and all that. This makes it incredibly easy to get around the island very quickly, letting you pretty much investigate at your leisure. I haven't even talked about my favorite part of the world building, which is the moon. To keep it brief, there is a golden city on the dark side of the moon that humans had to abandon because a god called Lost Pain took it over and is now leeching the moon's energy for power with the aid of his moon cultists. This has resulted in a massive chasm that splits the moon in two between the light and dark sides. I could not live with myself if I went through this whole video without mentioning that, because that is maybe the coolest world building in any video game ever made. Now you know how to Paradise Killer like a pro. Speaking of Paradise Killer, last thing, and then we're wrapping this up. The title, Paradise Killer, is so good. It has so many meanings that I'm probably not even thinking of all of them. There's the obvious one, which is the Perfect 25, this fabled paradise whose arrival has been marred and somewhat ruined and arguably killed by this mass murder. You could also see it as you being the Paradise Killer, as you returning from an extreme period of exile, and very few of your former coworkers are excited to see you return. Especially in the minds of the guilty, whose plan is working until you arrive, you're the killer of their paradise. Finally, maybe my favorite interpretation of the title is the literal killer in the murder mystery having killed Paradise through their actions. It's probably the most obvious one, but when you actually know the details of who killed who and for what reason, them being referred to as a Paradise Killer is actually kinda clever. I don't want to give that away though. It's clever. So, that's that. Friendly reminder that I write. I have a dark fantasy book of conspiracies and murders of my own called The Harrow's Harbinger. There's also a short story collection of dark fantasy tales sure to make your spine shiver, upcoming in July at the earliest. You can find more details on both of those on my website, linked down below. Thank you so much for watching. I genuinely encourage you to play through Paradise Killer yourself, especially armed with the knowledge that I have granted you here today. One final thing. As I've said a couple times, I'm a writer. I love this game, and I wanted to show my appreciation for this game beyond just a video gushing about it. So, I thought about it a lot, and I realized that there is a collectible at the very beginning of the game. There's actually two collectibles that you can miss. I think there's three, actually. 2 or 3 at the very beginning of the game in the Exile Idle Lands, where, you know, you can miss them. If you leave at the beginning and without catching them, you can never go back. So there are 3 missable collectibles in the game. One of them is a well-read book about an ex-gangster who decided to master the art of chicken skewers. Which, that's the only thing Lady Love Dies had to read in all that time, up in millions of days of exile. So, to honor her torment and to honor my love for the game, by the time this video is up, there will be a short story about an ex-gangster who decides to master the art of chicken skewers up on my website for free. Please go check it out. At the time of recording this, I have not written it, but when the video is uploaded, it will be up. So I don't know how it's gonna turn out, man. Shit. I hope it's good, but I think it's a fun little way of expressing my appreciation for the game. Thank you to the developers who made this game. Thank you to everyone who was so goddamn creative, and thank you for giving me this experience, because I'll never have it again. I'll never get to play Paradise Killer for the first time again. Thank you. I mean that. And thanks for watching.